If you like this kind of chilling tale, click the like button and subscribe to Nightmare Narratives for more true horror stories. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you even more terrifying content. Get scared and we'll see you in the next video. I still remember the first time I heard about the Bell family and their peaceful life in Adams, Tennessee. It was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and the Bells were well-respected farmers. Their home, a modest farmhouse surrounded by acres of lush farmland, was the picture of tranquility. The family consisted of John Bell Sr., his wife Lucy, and their children, including the youngest, Betsy Bell, a sweet and lively girl. The Bells lived a quiet life, far removed from the chaos of the cities. Their days were filled with the simple pleasures of farming and family gatherings. But all that changed in the early 1800s when strange occurrences began to disrupt their peaceful existence. It started with small, almost imperceptible events. John Bell Sr. would hear faint knocking sounds on the walls of their home. At first, he dismissed them as the creaks and groans of an old house. But soon, the knocking grew louder and more frequent. The entire family began to hear it, and it was always around the same time, just after sunset. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the knocking became so loud it felt as if someone was pounding on the walls with a hammer. The children clung to their mother, their eyes wide with fear. John Bell Sr. searched the house inside and out but found nothing that could explain the noise. As the weeks went by, the occurrences escalated. Doors would open and close on their own, and objects would move inexplicably. One night, Betsy screamed in terror as she felt an invisible force tugging at her hair. Lucy Bell, a woman of strong faith, prayed for protection, but the disturbances only grew more intense. The once peaceful Bell farmhouse had become a place of dread. The community began to whisper about the happenings at the Bell home, and visitors came to witness the phenomena for themselves. Despite their efforts to remain strong and find rational explanations, the Bell family could not deny that something sinister was at work. The disturbances at the Bell farmhouse escalated rapidly, turning from minor annoyances into full-blown terror. One particularly chilling night stands out in my memory. It was late, and the entire family had just settled down for bed when an ear-piercing scream shattered the silence. We all rushed to Betsy's room, where we found her thrashing wildly, as if fighting an invisible assailant. "Help me! It's trying to hurt me," she cried, her voice hoarse with terror. John Bell Sr. and his sons tried to restrain her, but it was as if an unseen force had taken control. Betsy's body was lifted off the bed, suspended in midair for what felt like an eternity before being dropped back down. Her face was pale, and tears streamed down her cheeks. That was the night we knew this was no ordinary haunting. The entity, whatever it was, had a particular interest in Betsy. It targeted her relentlessly, pulling her hair, pinching her, and leaving bruises all over her body. Lucy Bell, ever the pillar of strength, doubled her efforts in prayer, hoping to shield her daughter from further harm. But the attacks grew bolder. The entire house seemed to be under siege. Objects flew across rooms, shattering against walls. Doors would slam shut with such force that the frames cracked. At night, the air was thick with the sounds of footsteps, as if a crowd of invisible people were marching through the halls. The worst part was the voice. A deep, guttural growl that would reverberate through the house, mocking us, threatening us. "You cannot escape me," it would say, sending chills down our spines. It was during one of these nights that John Bell Sr. began to fall ill. He complained of a swelling in his throat and a feeling of being choked. No doctor could find a cause, but we all knew it was the entity's doing. The community, once skeptical, began to take notice. Neighbors offered their help, but nothing seemed to work. The Bell family was trapped in a nightmare, with no end in sight. Every evening, we braced ourselves for another onslaught, never knowing what horrors the night would bring. Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, the investigators we had called in, were relentless in their pursuit of answers. They documented everything, from the physical attacks on Betsy to the disembodied voices that filled the house. But even they seemed at a loss for how to combat such a powerful force. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the Bell family's resolve began to wane. We were all exhausted, our nerves frayed. Yet, through it all, there was a glimmer of hope. We knew that if we could survive this, if we could find a way to banish the entity, we might finally find peace. But at what cost? The true extent of the Bell Witch's malevolence was still to be revealed. As the haunting continued, the Bell family's plight became the talk of the town. Word spread quickly, and soon the Bell farmhouse was a hub of activity, with curious neighbors and concerned friends coming by to witness the strange occurrences for themselves. Some came out of genuine concern, while others were merely drawn by morbid curiosity. I remember one evening, a local pastor, Reverend Johnson, visited the house. He had heard the stories and wanted to offer his assistance. As he stepped inside, the air seemed to thicken with an oppressive presence. He looked around, his face pale and drawn. "This place, it feels wrong," he muttered, clutching his Bible tighter. We gathered in the living room, hoping that his prayers might bring some relief. Reverend Johnson began to read passages from the Bible, his voice steady but filled with apprehension. As he spoke, the house responded. The temperature dropped sharply, and a deep, guttural growl echoed through the walls. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. "Leave this place," the voice snarled, seemingly directed at the pastor. Reverend Johnson stood firm, continuing his prayers despite the mounting terror. Suddenly, a heavy book flew off the shelf, narrowly missing his head. He finished his prayer with a shaking voice, clearly rattled by the experience. "There's something truly evil here," he said as he left, his eyes filled with concern. "You need more than just prayers to rid this house of its darkness." Despite the fear, the community rallied around the Bell family. They took turns staying with us, offering their support and protection. Yet, no matter how many people were in the house, the entity's attacks never ceased. It seemed to thrive on the collective fear, growing bolder with each passing day. One particularly harrowing night, a group of townsfolk gathered outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. They stood in the cold, their breath visible in the frosty air, eyes fixed on the windows. Inside, we could hear the familiar sounds of footsteps and whispering voices. The tension was palpable. Suddenly, the front door slammed open, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The crowd gasped, stepping back in fear. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched from the window. The entity's presence was undeniable, a malevolent force that seemed to revel in our terror. The investigators, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, were tireless in their efforts to document the phenomena. They set up more equipment, hoping to capture undeniable proof of the haunting. One night, as they reviewed their recordings, they captured something chilling, a voice, clear and distinct, saying, "I am the spirit of a man who was wronged." This revelation only added to the mystery. Who was this spirit? What wrong had been done to it, and why was it taking its vengeance on the Bell family? The answers eluded us, but the fear was very real. Every creak, every whisper, every unexplained phenomenon deepened our dread. As the weeks wore on, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Sleep was a distant memory, and our days were spent in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Yet, through it all, the Bell family remained strong. We clung to each other, drawing strength from our shared determination to survive the ordeal. Despite the relentless attacks, there was a growing sense of resolve. We would not be driven from our home. The entity might be powerful, but our love and unity were stronger. We faced each night with a grim determination, knowing that, somehow, we would endure. The true battle was yet to come, but we were ready to confront whatever horrors lay ahead. As the weeks went by, the activity in the Bell house only seemed to intensify. The strange phenomena had become a daily occurrence, and the once skeptical neighbors were now fully convinced that something unholy was at play. The local authorities, initially dismissive, started taking the claims more seriously after witnessing some of the inexplicable events firsthand. One evening, the sheriff himself decided to spend the night at the Bell house. He arrived with a stern expression, his demeanor a mix of skepticism and determination. "I need to see this for myself," he stated, setting his hat down on the kitchen table. The tension in the room was palpable as he made his way through the house, inspecting every corner. We gathered in the living room, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the ever-present fear. The sheriff sat with us, his eyes darting around, alert for any sign of the supernatural. As the night wore on, the house grew unnervingly quiet. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the presence had receded. Then, without warning, a series of loud bangs echoed through the house. The sheriff jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. The banging grew louder, more insistent, and the walls seemed to vibrate with each impact. "Show yourself," the sheriff shouted, his voice steady but laced with fear. Suddenly, a chair flew across the room, narrowly missing his head. The guttural voice returned, filled with malice. "You cannot stop me," it growled. The sheriff's face turned pale, and he took a step back, clearly shaken by the encounter. He spent the rest of the night patrolling the house, determined to protect us despite the overwhelming odds. As dawn approached, the activity subsided, leaving the house in an eerie silence. The sheriff left, his skepticism shattered. "There's something truly evil here," he admitted quietly. "I've never seen anything like it." The word spread, and soon, more investigators and curious onlookers arrived. Among them were renowned paranormal experts and journalists eager to document the events. Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, who had been diligently collecting evidence, welcomed the additional scrutiny, hoping that more eyes might shed light on the mystery. One night, a well-known journalist from a national newspaper joined us. She had heard the stories and wanted to witness the phenomena herself. With her notepad in hand, she interviewed each of us, detailing our experiences and emotions. Her skepticism was evident, but as the night progressed, the house made its presence known. The journalist was recording an interview with Peggy when the air grew cold. The lights flickered, and a low, menacing growl filled the room. Peggy's face went pale, and she clutched her hands together, trying to stay calm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The journalist nodded, her eyes wide with shock. This is real," she muttered, scribbling furiously in her notebook. As she wrote, the guttural voice spoke again, addressing her directly. "You cannot tell my story," it hissed. The journalist's pen slipped from her hand, and she looked around, fear etched on her face. The presence seemed to feed off her fear, growing bolder. Objects in the room began to move, and the walls creaked ominously. The journalist, now a believer, backed away slowly, her expression one of dawning horror. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined," she confessed later. "The world needs to know about this." The constant influx of visitors took its toll on the Bell family. Each new encounter seemed to drain us further, the relentless scrutiny adding to our stress. Yet, there was a sense of grim determination. We needed the world to see, to understand the terror that had invaded our home. The more people knew, the greater the chance that someone, somewhere, might hold the key to ending our nightmare. The night of the final confrontation was like no other. The air was thick with tension and dread as we gathered in the living room. Maurice and Guy had decided that this would be our last attempt to rid the house of the malevolent entity. They believed that a powerful exorcism might be our only hope. The family huddled together, a mix of fear and determination in their eyes. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles. The investigators had set up their equipment, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Maurice began to recite prayers and incantations, his voice steady and resolute. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and we could see our breath in the cold air. As the exorcism continued, the house responded violently. Objects flew across the room, smashing into walls. The guttural voice filled the air, louder and angrier than ever before. "You cannot banish me," it roared. "This is my home." Janet, who had been at the center of the haunting, suddenly convulsed and began to levitate. Her eyes rolled back, and she spoke in that same, deep voice. "You will all suffer," she threatened. Peggy rushed to her daughter's side, tears streaming down her face. "Leave her alone," she cried. "Take me instead." The entity seemed to consider her words. Janet dropped to the floor, unconscious but alive. The voice shifted its attention to Peggy, taunting her, trying to break her spirit. But Peggy stood firm, her love for her children giving her strength. The intensity of the exorcism reached its peak. The walls shook, and the floor vibrated beneath our feet. Maurice and Guy continued their prayers, their voices rising above the chaos. I felt a strange mix of fear and hope, as if we were on the brink of something monumental. Then, there was a moment of silence. The entity let out a final, agonized scream before the room was plunged into an eerie calm. The oppressive presence that had filled the house seemed to lift, and the temperature began to rise. We all stood there, stunned and exhausted. Maurice and Guy checked on Janet, who slowly regained consciousness. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she seemed to be herself again. Peggy hugged her tightly, relief and love radiating from her. The investigators reviewed their recordings and declared that the exorcism had been successful. The entity, it seemed, had been driven away, at least for now. The house, once a place of terror, felt strangely peaceful. In the days that followed, the Hodgson family began to heal. The lingering fear and trauma would take time to fade, but there was a newfound sense of hope. They started to rebuild their lives, finding moments of joy and normalcy that had been stolen from them. I visited them often, offering support and friendship. The bond we had formed through the shared ordeal was strong. We spoke of the entity less and less, focusing instead on the future and the possibility of true peace. As I reflect on those harrowing months, I am struck by the resilience and courage of the Hodgson family. They faced unimaginable terror but emerged stronger, united by their love for one another. The Enfield house, with its dark history, had been a place of suffering, but it was also a testament to the power of human spirit and the unyielding fight against darkness.